We are in John chapter 10 today, so I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and turn to John chapter 10, and we'll pick up where we left off last week. Last week we were in John chapter 9. We finished John chapter 9, and but this week we're in John chapter 10, and there's something kind of similar between the two. There is a connection between the two. Last week, you might have noticed that Jesus reiterated that he was the light of the world. And this week, we have a couple more I am statements. And I'd like to remind you that in the book of John, there are famously 7 I am statements. And just to reiterate, we've already gone over the bread of life in John chapter 6, and we looked at the light of the world in 8, and then just recently in 9. And then there is, I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am the resurrection and the life, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the true vine. And we haven't gotten to some of those yet, but today we're in the passage that Jesus is going to start talking about, I am the door and I am the good shepherd. And so we're not going to get to the full breadth of I am the good shepherd. We're not going to even get to that saying. But I am the door and I am the shepherd happen in the same passage. But we're going to focus today on the phrase that Jesus uses, I am the door. And of course, we'll read a little bit about him being the shepherd as well. But we're going to focus on I am the door. And one of the important things that we have to understand is when we look at this passage in John chapter 10 is that he's comparing us to sheep, and he's going to be a shepherd, we're going to be sheep. But let's go ahead and read John chapter 10 verses 1 through 10, then we'll get into it. It says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they did not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and I will and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So again, in this passage, you see that we are sheep. Okay, I don't know if that seems strange to you. I don't know if you're familiar with that sort of illustration, but we are compared to sheep quite often, and so why are we compared to sheep? Well, sheep are a flock type of an animal, and so I guess one instance is that we should be we're kind of designed to be a community people. That's the way God designed us, but there's obviously a lot more to it than they're just a flock animal, and we're kind of supposed to be a flock community of people. But there's also something a little more negative. One of the things that you'll know about sheep, if you research them or if you've had any experience with them, is sheep are kind of helpless. And so, yeah, we are being compared to a kind of helpless livestock. And sheep are very dependent on their shepherds. They are kind of helpless. They are not very good at defending themselves. And it's a little bit different from other creatures, because I don't know if you've ever heard about pigs or other creatures like donkeys or whatever, but I know that pigs are pretty good at defending themselves. I don't know if you've ever been in a pig pen and gotten run over by a pig before, but apparently that's pretty common. And I think I heard somewhere that the most dangerous farm animal is a pig. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And I also think about if a pig gets out in the wild, they don't go wander off and get themselves killed. They just grow into becoming a more fearsome beast that are terrifying to encounter in the wilderness. But sheep are not like that. They're dependent and they are helpless. I remember one time I also came into contact with a different kind of a herd animal, or I guess a livestock. I was doing a mission trip up in Washington, D.C., and we were helping out at this Christian camp, and they had a livestock pen, and you'll probably never guess what they had in it, but it was 2 emus. And I learned that day you have to be very careful around emus, because when you don't see them, that's when they're dangerous. And I was weed eating in there, and I saw the emus kind of doing this, sort of like Jurassic Park, is what it felt like, you know. And they came up behind me, and I had to jump over the fence before they attacked me. But that's not what sheep are like at all. Sheep need somebody to protect them. They need to be cared for, to be shown where to eat, to be shown where not to go and where to go, and to be helped to find their way. They need constant care. And sheep are prone to wander. And I don't know if that phrase resonates with you, but that's a very biblical phrase, being prone to wander. And that's what we are, is we are often very prone to wander. And so that's why Jesus compares us to sheep. And I would also just like to say that, you know, I've said a bunch of bad things about sheep, but sheep are kind of lovable. You know, you ever been around a sheep? They're kind of lovable. They're a little dirty, but they're a little lovable. I've been around, you know, the nativity sheep before. I don't know if you've ever been in a nativity play, but seen sheep, but they're kind of lovable. And so, you know, it's not all, the sheep connection isn't all bad, okay? Because the shepherd, the good shepherd, does connect with his sheep. And sheep do know the voice of their shepherd. And so the sheep and the shepherd, they do connect in a very meaningful way. So it's not all bad illustration. That is a very important aspect, the fact that we can connect to our shepherd. And so we see that we have the sheep illustration for the people, but in this particular instance, we're not actually talking about sheep out in a pasture right now, because Jesus is calling himself the door. And so what is this sheep pen that he's talking about? What is the sheep pen that he is the door to? And that's kind of what we need to nail down right here. And one of the things that you'll find is that when shepherds would come into town, they needed a place to keep their sheep. And so there were centralized or sheep pens in easy to access areas. And if the shepherd had business away from the sheep or had to stay away from them overnight, they would go into the sheep pen, and there would be a gatekeeper to welcome them in, and the sheep would stay there being barricaded in on all sides and then protected by the door and the gatekeeper. And so that's where they would stay when the shepherd was away. And so there was only one way in and one way out for legitimate people. And so this illustration right here that we're talking about with the sheep pen is an illustration of God keeping his sheep in this pen to await the good shepherd. So these sheep are waiting for Jesus, their good shepherd, and they're being kept in this pen. Now, specifically, the pen right here at this moment should be reminding us of Israel. And so what we're seeing is that the current flock within the pen that he's talking about right here, that current flock is supposed to be Israel. Now, one of the verses that I didn't read way down here, but is very relevant to that point, is verse 16. And it says, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. So eventually his other flock will join, meaning the Gentiles, but this current flock that he's talking about to these Jewish people that he's talking to is specifically the flock of Israel. And so Jesus is in the process of providing grace to true Israel within the flock. And eventually he will bring judgment on those that are not true Israel. But he is speaking to true Israel, bringing God, grace to them. And eventually he will bring the Gentiles, people who are not Jewish, but will be collected into his flock. He will bring them so that they will be one flock of God's people of faith. And so what we see here is, again, Jesus is calling himself two things, the door and the shepherd. And so before he talks about being the shepherd, he does say that he is the door. And one of the important things that we should remember is that the door is meant to only let in those who belong. And so Jesus is saying that he's the door and he's only going to let in those who belong. And so there's a couple of meanings there. The door only lets in those who belong, so there's a couple of meanings there. That means that the door is meant to keep out evil and fake shepherds. So Jesus is there to keep out evil and fake shepherds. And so he is basically delineating good from evil. So he's showing who is good and who is evil by who comes through the door or not. And what you'll see in verse 1, 8, and 10, I'll read those again. It says, "Truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber." And verse 8 again says, "All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them." And then verse 10, "The sheep, or the thief, comes only to steal, kill, and destroy." And we see that Jesus is not mincing words here. He's saying that the only people that are good come through the door, and those who come into the pen by means outside the door or other than the door are evil, and they will kill, steal, and destroy. Now, one of the things that is kind of interesting about those three verses is that one of them says, all those before Jesus were thieves. And that's a kind of a little confusing because if you think about it, God has sent prophets before. He's sent shepherds before. He's sent prophets, priests, kings, judges. He sent all those people before to shepherd Israel. But I think that the thing that delineates them as being good and not who Jesus is referring to is because they pointed to God's glory and they pointed to Jesus. They did not point to themselves. And the people that God is referring to are those who are pointing to themselves and are opposite of Jesus and are subversive to Jesus. So the fake leaders that he's pointing toward with that statement and those statements, I believe, are people like Pharisees, false prophets, and even fake and false messiahs. One of the things that I don't find mentioned too often, but it is true that especially recently, or very, very close in time to Jesus talking here, there were other people that pretended to be messiahs. And I actually have a verse from Acts. And I don't know if this is familiar to you, but there's a verse in Acts chapter 5, and it says, "For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in those days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered." So we see that in the days of the census, there were people that, and just before that, there were people that were claiming to be a Messiah, claiming to be a Savior for Israel. And so we see that Jesus is maybe referencing something that had happened recently and showing that those guys were false. All those guys that came before me were thieves, because what did they do? They led 400 men, and he was killed, and they were dispersed and came to nothing. And also we see, I think, another really important passage in Ezekiel talking about shepherds. talking about those false shepherds and the people that Jesus is warning us against. And it says that the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord, shepherds of Israel, you have been feeding yourselves. Should not shepherds feed sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened. The sick you have not healed. The injured you have not bound up. The strayed you have not brought back. The lost you have not sought. And with force and harshness you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And they became food for all the wild beasts. My sheep were scattered. They wandered all over the mountains and on every hill. My sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, with none to search or seek for them. And I really think that passage is probably one of the most pertinent passages to the hour that Jesus is talking about, because doesn't that not seem so familiar to what the Pharisees are doing? Does not remind you of the Pharisees wreaking havoc on the people of God, on Israel, and scattering them? Well, Jesus is saying that he's come for those, and so he has not come to steal, kill, and destroy like the Pharisees and the false prophets and the fake messiahs have done, seeking their own interests. But he's sought their interests for the glory of God. But the thieves, like we said, steal, kill, and destroy. And, when you think about it, it really does make sense, because, typically people that have no ownership of something or no real connection to those things, what is typical among the way people act is they consume those things, or they ravage those things that they do not own or care for. And so that's what he's saying to the thieves that do not have any business in leadership or have any ownership or any sort of stake in the flock of God. They've come there only to seek their own ends, like the Pharisees are doing, like the false prophets do, like the fake messiahs that have been talked about. That's all they can do, and we see this over in history, where whole countries can be ravaged and consumed by people that do not care anything for the people of that place. Or there's all kinds of examples that we know about. One of the most interesting, I think, examples of somebody who has no claim going against somebody who does is when Solomon is trying to deal with apparently two mothers of the same baby. And Solomon does something very wise to determine who the real mother is, because obviously both of them can't be mothers of the same baby. And so who's the real mother? Solomon says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the baby in half, and we're going to give both of you half of the baby. And of course, the real mother, who actually cares for the child, says, give it to the other woman. And so Solomon knows who the real mother is, because the real mother is the only one who is actually willing to care for the child. And the one who has no claim to the child just says, destroy it. Because she doesn't care about the child. She only cares for her own ends. And so that's what we're talking about with the thieves that come in to steal, kill, and destroy. They have no claim. The Pharisees have no connection to the true Israel. They're not connected by faith. True Israel are those who have faith in the Lord. And what we've seen Jesus say time and time again is that quite obviously these Pharisees have no connection to the Lord. And so they are only there to steal, kill, and destroy. But in this illustration, we do see that the one who goes over the fence is the one who operates on self-importance and will kill a sheep just to throw it back over the fence and steal it. But the one who enters by the door, it says, is the Messiah. The one who enters by the door is the Messiah. And God has not made any Messiah except for Jesus. Jesus is the only Messiah. And I feel like I probably need to clean up that word. God didn't make Jesus, okay? God didn't make Jesus. Jesus is God. But there is only one Messiah, and it is Jesus. And we know that all the under-shepherds that he had sent before, like we talked about, the prophets, the priests, the judges, the kings, the good ones, they have pointed to Jesus, and they have pointed for our need for him. And the fake saviors and shepherds, they only try to lead the sheep astray. Now, the thing is, that kind of sounds scary, doesn't it? To think that, wow, so some sheep can be led astray. Well, here's the thing. It tells us plainly and clearly that within the pen of Israel, it says that the true Israel is going to hear Jesus and they're going to follow him. And it also says that they are not going to listen to the stranger. They're not going to listen to the thief. And so it's kind of scary to think that oh man, once, so obviously now we're all brought into the same fold, Jews and Gentiles, by the connection. We are all connected by faith in Jesus. And so it's kind of scary to think, oh man, can people still jump over the fence and take us away? Can people still jump over the fence and take us away? Well, I guess what we need to concentrate on is that God's sheep do not listen to the fake Jesuses. God's sheep will not be led astray by the thieves. And so I think what we can be encouraged is that those of us who know the goodness of Jesus are going to know our shepherd's voice. It's not hard. It's not going to be hard to know the difference between Jesus calling to us and the thief calling to us. And also, just to be clear, this illustration, sometimes illustrations we can kind of take them maybe a little bit further than they're meant to. And this illustration is not meant to scare us away from being within God's sheep pen, because one of the things that we do know about God is that no one can take us from his hand. It says that the thieves come in to steal, kill, and destroy, but I'm telling you that this illustration is not meaning that you can be stolen from his hand. If you are in Jesus, you are not going to be stolen from the hand of the Lord. And so no one can separate your soul from God. That's not what this illustration is trying to scare you into thinking. But it is saying that no one saves but Jesus, and no one shepherds us but Jesus and those who he has providentially put in that place, but only to point to Jesus. And so Jesus is the door, and he has been preserving true Israel for himself, and he's also the door that keeps his now singular flock in his pen. And so he is the door, and he is the way of salvation. But I'd like to read a few verses to highlight a different aspect of this illustration. And this is verses 3, 4, 9, and 10. And it says, to him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And in number 9, it says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So be encouraged that those verses are the verses to pay attention to if you are in the Lord. Those verses are true for you. If you are with Jesus in faith, you will only listen to him. If you are in Jesus in faith, nobody will come in to steal you away from him. And you will have life and have it abundantly. Now, there's a really interesting phrase there. Go in and out and find pasture. And go in and out is a phrase that is used in the Bible and other places. And I found a couple of relevant passages that I thought would be interesting for us to look at and how they connect to this passage. And one of those is from Deuteronomy 28. And it says, all of these blessings shall come to you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. And I thought it was such a great passage to remind us about this going in and coming out, as a reminder of how God is blessing our coming and going, and it's an all-encompassing blessing. It's a blessing that is far-reaching. And I thought that's such a nice phrase to complement this passage and how God works and how God blesses our going in and going out. But there was one other passage that I actually thought was even better and much more specifically relevant to the passage that we just read, and it comes from Numbers. And you might like this one. It says, from Numbers 27, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep who have no shepherd. And that passage right there from Numbers is speaking about Joshua. Replacing Moses, being appointed to Moses' position, Joshua coming and leading Israel. And I don't know how much more perfect it could get, but Joshua is just the same name as Jesus in Hebrew. Joshua in Greek is Jesus. Jesus in Hebrew is Joshua. Thought, man, what an amazing passage to show us that this is how God works. He gives, like I said, he's been giving people like this as shepherds for his flock, and as an example of how Jesus will do it perfectly, and none of the ones sent before Jesus did it perfectly, but Jesus will do it perfectly, and he will be the good shepherd perfectly. But again, we're focusing on the door today, but he is the door that lets in the good shepherd himself. And so we see that this passage is not just for Israel, though, as I said. This passage, as he is talking in verses 1 through 10, seems to be very specifically for Israel, but there are some clues that it's not just for Israel, like I said in verse 16, but also in verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. And like I said, eventually, Jesus will in this passage, he says he's going to get his other flock and bring them in to the fold. So if you are a believer in Jesus, you have been brought in through the door. You have been brought in through the door and by your good shepherd. And so it says that if anyone comes through the door, they will be saved. So this is not just for Israel, it is for the world now. And anybody who enters the door is saved. And wonderfully, it says that those who listen to Jesus will have abundant life. Those who listen, everybody who listens to Jesus, Jew or Gentile, will have abundant life. However, this is one of the other really important aspects of the door, is that it is one door. It is one door. There is one way to salvation. And the only way to salvation, the only way to be a part of God's flock is to be brought in by the shepherd, through that one door. If you try to get in by any other way, whether works or any other way, you're basically like a thief. And so there's only one way to Jesus, that one door. And so salvation is exclusive. And I don't know if that sounds harsh to you or not, but salvation is exclusive. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing that's exclusive, or else it would be full of thieves and robbers. And so salvation is exclusive, and it's exclusive so that we can have abundant life with our Good Shepherd. Now, there are people that believe that there are many ways to God, and so we obviously deny that. Especially, as Christians and especially as Baptists, we absolutely deny that there are multiple ways to God, but there are many people who believe there are multiple ways. And but we absolutely, emphatically deny that. Now, one of the things is that people would say, how can you believe that God would be that limiting, that he would only provide one way? I mean, isn't God bigger than that? Isn't God bigger than just one way? Isn't God more loving than just one way? Wouldn't he want to seek everybody? Wouldn't he want to have everybody come in with whatever way works? And I would just remind us that we are blessed to have one way. We don't even deserve one way at all. Israel or Gentiles, nobody of faith deserves even that one way into his sheep pen at all. And so the mere fact that we even have a gate or a door is immense blessing beyond words, is immense blessing beyond what we can fathom and imagine. And so if you ever get tempted to think, wow, man, the one way seems kind of strict, just think, we're absolutely blessed to even have that door at all. The fact that Jesus is given to us as the door is amazing. And I would remind us that the narrow is the way for salvation, and wide is the path that leads to destruction. And it is a wonderful thing that we even have the narrow way that leads us to the door for us to enter in, to be people of faith, connected with God. So let's pray. God, we thank you so much for today, this Mother's Day that we're able to celebrate with our loved ones. God, we thank you that as we think about this passage, that you have provided a way for us to be with you. God, you guarded over Israel for so many years, and you were the door that protected them, and you were the shepherd that went in and called the people of faith to you. God, we know that you have brought in the rest of the world, the rest of those who would have faith in you. You've brought us into your flock. And we thank you for that. We thank you for providing us a door. Thank you for being the door that let us in. Thank you that those who go through the door and those who listen to the Good Shepherd will find pasture and have abundant life from this day forward into eternity. We thank you so much for the promise of heaven and the promise of being with our Good Shepherd and being guided all the way. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.